Hello and welcome to Calm the Pharm podcast, where pharmacy business meets legal wisdom, minus the headache. In each episode, we share practical legal tips and real-life examples to help you run your pharmacy with confidence. I'm your host, Sarah Stoddart. Thanks very much for joining us. Last week on the podcast, we spoke about structures and in particular, the company structure. What you would have learnt from that episode is that the ownership of pharmacy businesses, or any businesses in fact, can be achieved via various ownership structures. It is one of the first decisions that a prospective purchaser or business owner will make, and that is how they will structure the business. And as I discussed last week, there are pros and cons of every structure. However, all too often there is confusion about partnership and shareholding structures. I see all the time clients or other parties suggesting that legal advice be obtained in relation to an ownership structure and incorrectly referring to it as a partnership when it may in fact be a shareholding arrangement, and vice versa, referring to a shareholding arrangement that would be a partnership. It's important to get it correct because if you get it wrong and that's realised too far down the track, there's been a lot of time and money wasted. So what are the structure differences? And they are very different, and it is important that they're clearly understood. So a partnership is when two or more individuals or companies come together with a common goal and with a view of operating a business for profit. It is the partnership, being the combination of partners, be it individuals or companies, that owns the business. So it's the partnership of John Smith and XYZ Proprietary Limited, or XYZ Proprietary Limited and ABC Proprietary Limited. It is the combination of those two or more that own the business, and it is the partners, so John Smith in his own right or XYZ Proprietary Limited in his own right, that share the profits, liabilities and management according to their partnership interest and, importantly, partnership agreement. So as partners, you have an interest, 50-50, 70-30, 60-40, whatever it is, and that is usually the way in which the profits and liabilities are shared. It may be different in the partnership agreement, and if it is different, I'd question why that is the case. But also your partnership agreement is core to determining how profits will be determined and when. So although a partnership agreement is not mandatory, I hope by now, and if you are a long-term listener of the podcast, I hope I've really made it clear that it is strongly recommended. It is like the Bible for business structures, partnership structures. So I don't at all ever recommend proceeding in a partnership without that agreement in place. On the other hand, a shareholding arrangement is a structure where individuals own shares in a company. So there's one company and there's individual as shareholders. And the shareholders have an ownership interest and rights within that company. So the shareholders usually have a right to dividend and a right to voting as well. There are some circumstances where they don't have voting rights attached to particular shares, and usually that would be where that shareholder is not a pharmacist, so they may be a spouse or an adult child. But there are rights attached to different classes of shares. And a shareholding arrangement is governed by, or should be governed by rather, a shareholders agreement. So where a shareholding arrangement exists, it is the company that owns the asset, XYZ Proprietary Limited perhaps, not the individual shareholders. The shareholders just benefit from the company's operation of the business. Once you understand the two structures, a partnership structure and a shareholders structure, it's important to then consider some of the key differences, and these will inform which way you go. So the three key differences which you need to know are 1, exposure to liability, 2, profit sharing and distribution, 3, ease of continuity and transferability. So 1, exposure to liability. In most partnership structures, partners have unlimited liability for the debts and obligations of the business. This means personal assets of the partners can be and often are at risk. Unlimited liability exists irrespective of what percentage interest a partner holds in the partnership as a whole. And as I mentioned last week, this is known as joint and several liability. So a minority partner still has unlimited liability and liability for the partnership as a whole, even though they are a minority partner. Sometimes liability can be limited or capped for particular parties. For example, your bank might limit a partner's exposure or liability, but as a structure, it's joint and several liability. On the other hand, shareholders have limited liability, so they are only liable up to the amount they invested in the shares in the company. So in most circumstances, the shareholders would not be held personally liable for the actions of the company. It may be the directors and they may be the same person, but typically shareholders are not. Number 2, profit sharing and distribution. So in a partnership, profits and losses are shared amongst the partners, typically, like I said, in proportion to their interest in the business, which should be set out in the partnership agreement. The partnership itself does not usually retain any profits. It may retain some for capital, but typically it doesn't retain any profits. On the other hand, shareholders receive profits via dividend, which are distributed based on the number of shares the individual holds in the company. Dividends are not guaranteed. The fund may remain in the company without a distribution, or distribution may be limited. And number 3, ease of continuity and transferability. Partnerships often face challenges with continuity, especially where there is a low number of partners. In some circumstances, those challenges result in a partnership being dissolved or restructured, which often then leads to the sale of the business as a whole and the winding up of the partnership. Further, the sale of a partnership interest in pharmacy results in a new PBS approval number. So every time a new partner enters or one exits, there's a new number. And that, of course, can cause disruption to both the business and its employees. On the other hand, shares in a company are more transferable. Shares can often be sold or transferred without affecting the existence or the operation of the company in which those shares exist. And for pharmacy businesses, a change in shareholding does not impact on the existing PBS approval number the company holds in respect to the pharmacy business. Another big difference between partnerships and shareholding insofar as continuity and transferability is stamp duty. So if the shares are held in a private company, so it's not listed, there is no stamp duty at the moment, at least, and I'm speaking from a Queensland perspective here, on the transfer of those shares, whereas for a sale of a partnership interest and the purchase of a partnership interest, at least in Queensland, that attracts stamp duty. So stamp duty is another consideration to take into account. So it's important that you understand these structures and the differences between them, as well as the similarities, before you can actually make a decision. And I do hope that this episode has been helpful. Thanks. Speak to you next week.